The chimney smoke rises straight up into the English countryside night. But something is wrong with the way moonlight catches the vapor trail. It shimmers differently than wood smoke should, carries traces of metallic reflection that make German radar operators 200 miles away scratch their heads and recalibrate equipment they're certain must be malfunctioning. Because according to their instruments, that small bakery in Kent is broadcasting radar signatures identical to a Royal Air Force fighter squadron, complete with individual aircraft profiles, formation patterns, and tactical maneuvers that suggest 12 Spitfires are conducting night patrol exercises directly above Thomas Hartwell's bread ovens. But Thomas isn't thinking about radar signatures as he adjusts the dampers on his brick ovens, fine-tuning the combustion patterns that will transform tomorrow's flour into the daily bread that keeps his village fed, while rationing makes every grain precious. He's thinking about fuel efficiency, about how to maintain proper baking temperatures with coal allocations that decrease monthly, about the particular challenge of producing consistent results when wartime shortages force constant adaptation of techniques his family has refined through 4 generations of commercial baking. What he doesn't know is that his grandfather's modifications to the bakery's chimney system, combined with the metallic composition of modern coal ash and the specific angles at which his brick ovens radiate heat into the night sky, have accidentally created the most sophisticated radar deception system in the European theater. What he can't imagine is that his brilliantly stupid solution to wartime fuel shortages is about to save thousands of Allied lives by convincing German bomber crews that heavily defended airspace exists where only flour dust and yeast actually operate under cover of darkness. This is October 1943. The Battle of Britain has been won, but the war in the air continues with deadly mathematics that measure victory in percentages of bombers that fail to return. In radar operators who detect incoming threats, minutes or seconds before civilian populations, learn whether their shelters will prove adequate against high, explosive and incendiary bombs designed to break both infrastructure and morale through systematic destruction of everything that makes ordinary life possible. Radar technology represents the cutting edge of electronic warfare, the invisible battle between detection and concealment that determines whether fighter squadrons intercept bomber formations before they reach target areas, or whether cities wake to the sound of air raid sirens that arrive too late to prevent catastrophic damage. British radar stations along the coast provide early warning of German aircraft crossing the channel, but coverage includes gaps that experienced pilots exploit, blind spots where low-flying bombers can penetrate inland defenses and strike targets with minimal advance warning. The German Luftwaffe has developed sophisticated countermeasures against British radar systems, electronic jamming techniques that confuse ground-based operators, metallic chaff that creates false signatures on detection screens, tactical approaches that minimize radar exposure while maximizing strike effectiveness. Their pilots understand how to read British defensive patterns, how to identify gaps in radar coverage, how to time attacks for maximum surprise and minimum interception probability. But Thomas Hartwell's bakery represents something entirely outside German tactical planning. A radar signature that makes no sense according to any known British defensive strategy. An electronic anomaly that suggests either equipment malfunction or tactical innovation that German intelligence has failed to anticipate. The radar profiles that emanate from his ovens don't match any aircraft in the British inventory, don't correspond to known flight patterns, don't behave according to normal fighter squadron protocols. The discovery happens accidentally, the way most important wartime innovations occur when desperate circumstances force creative adaptation of civilian resources for military purposes. Flight Lieutenant David Richardson is conducting routine radar calibration exercises when he notices impossible readings from grid reference TQ-47, a rural area that contains nothing more militarily significant than farms, village churches, and Thomas Hartwell's bakery that supplies bread to 3 surrounding communities despite coal shortages that force most commercial ovens to operate on reduced schedules. The radar signature shows 12 distinct aircraft profiles maintaining perfect formation at 8,000 feet altitude, executing standard patrol patterns with discipline that suggests experienced pilots and well-maintained equipment. But visual confirmation reveals only empty sky above countryside that hasn't seen military aircraft for months. Clear autumn air that contains nothing more exotic than wood smoke from cottage chimneys and the more substantial vapor cloud that rises from the bakery's modified chimney system. Richardson reports the anomaly through proper channels, expecting equipment malfunction or atmospheric interference that creates false readings on detection screens. Military radar systems are sophisticated but temperamental, susceptible to weather conditions, electromagnetic interference, equipment aging that degrades performance in ways that peacetime maintenance schedules could address, but wartime resource allocation cannot accommodate. False readings happen frequently enough that operators develop protocols for distinguishing genuine aircraft signatures from electronic ghosts that appear and disappear without corresponding to actual threats. But the investigation reveals something unprecedented. The radar signatures from the bakery are not random electronic noise or equipment malfunction. They demonstrate consistent patterns, repeatable characteristics, sophisticated behavior that suggests intentional rather than accidental generation. The 12 aircraft maintain formation discipline, respond to weather changes the way real pilots would adjust for wind and visibility, even demonstrate tactical variations that correspond to different phases of the moon and varying levels of German bomber activity over the Channel. Wing Commander Patricia Hayes, one of the few female radar specialists in the Royal Air Force, conducts the technical analysis that reveals the impossible truth. The metallic content of modern coal ash, when combined with the specific combustion patterns of Thomas's modified ovens and the particular geometry of his grandfather's chimney design, creates electromagnetic reflections that mimic aircraft signatures with startling accuracy. The radar profiles that confused German operators represent genuine physical phenomena. Electromagnetic waves bouncing off metallic particles suspended in heated air currents according to physics that nobody had previously thought to apply to military deception. The science is complex, but the results are simple. Thomas's ovens accidentally generate radar signatures indistinguishable from British fighter squadrons, complete with individual aircraft characteristics, formation patterns, and behavioral variations that suggest active pilot control rather than automated system operation. The German radar operators who detect these signatures interpret them as evidence of British air defenses that don't actually exist. RAF squadrons that patrol empty airspace above rural Kent with dedication that suggests strategic importance, far exceeding the actual military value of sheep pastures and wheat fields. Thomas receives his first official visitors on a Tuesday morning, when the ovens are cooling from the previous night's baking cycle and the village street still carries the warm scent of fresh bread that makes wartime rationing feel slightly less oppressive. The military personnel who arrive in unmarked vehicles speak carefully about national security requirements, about civilian contributions to the war effort, about the particular importance of maintaining normal bakery operations while making small modifications that might prove valuable for purposes they cannot discuss in detail. The conversation unfolds with the polite complexity that develops when military officials need civilian cooperation for projects they cannot fully explain. When national security requirements conflict with the democratic transparency that citizens expect from their government during peacetime, but must sacrifice during wartime for the greater good of collective survival. Thomas learns that his ovens generate electromagnetic signatures of interest to the military, that continuing normal baking operations could serve strategic purposes, that small modifications to his chimney system might enhance effects that he doesn't understand, but that represent significant tactical advantages against German forces. The modifications begin immediately. Military engineers work with Thomas to optimize the electromagnetic properties of his oven operations, adjusting chimney angles, modifying coal mixture ratios, installing equipment that enhances the radar signatures his ovens generate while maintaining the bread production that serves his community and provides cover for activities that German intelligence must never suspect serve military rather than purely civilian purposes. The enhanced system produces radar signatures that convince German bomber crews they face heavy fighter opposition in areas where no British aircraft actually operate, where defensive resources are minimal, where successful penetration should be routine according to tactical assessments that fail to account for the electromagnetic deception emanating from a village bakery that appears on no military maps and serves no strategic function that enemy intelligence can identify. German bomber formations begin avoiding Kent airspace that appears heavily defended according to radar intelligence, but actually contains only sheep, wheat, and Thomas Hartwell's enhanced ovens broadcasting false aircraft signatures with electronic sophistication that rivals purpose-built military radar deception systems. The tactical impact exceeds all projections. Bomber routes shift toward areas where genuine British defenses wait in greater concentration, where real fighter squadrons can intercept incoming aircraft with higher probability of success. The psychological effect proves equally significant. German pilots develop respect for British radar capabilities that seem to include defensive resources in areas where no military installations should exist. Electronic warfare sophistication that suggests technical advances beyond German intelligence estimates. The apparent ability to deploy phantom squadrons that exist only on radar screens but demonstrate convincing tactical behavior creates uncertainty about British defensive capabilities that influences German strategic planning in ways that extend far beyond the specific airspace that Thomas's ovens actually protect. The operational security around the bakery project requires elaborate cover stories, explanations for the unusual activity that visiting military personnel generate in a rural community where strangers attract attention and questions that cannot be answered honestly without compromising the entire operation. Thomas becomes an unofficial actor in a deception that requires him to behave normally while participating in activities that violate everything normal about civilian life during wartime. When bread baking becomes military operation disguised as commercial food production, the success creates demands for expansion. Other bakeries receive similar modifications, transforming a network of rural food production facilities into radar deception system that creates phantom air defenses across southern England. Electronic illusions that convince German reconnaissance flights they face opposition that exists only in the electromagnetic spectrum generated by modified ovens operating according to specifications that combine traditional baking techniques with cutting-edge electronic warfare applications. But the original bakery remains the most effective installation, perhaps because Thomas's understanding of his equipment allows optimization that other bakers cannot achieve. Perhaps because his grandfather's chimney modifications create electromagnetic properties that prove difficult to replicate. Perhaps because 4 generations of baking experience provide intuitive understanding of combustion patterns that military engineers struggle to duplicate through purely technical analysis. The intelligence reports that filter back through captured German aircrew reveal the success of the deception. Bomber pilots describe encountering fighter opposition in areas where British records show no aircraft activity. Radar operators report tracking formations that disappear without explanation. Tactical planners revise route assessments based on defensive capabilities that exist only in the electromagnetic reflections generated by civilian ovens operated according to military specifications disguised as normal commercial food production. Thomas adapts to his dual role with the particular resilience that rural communities develop when extraordinary circumstances require ordinary people to participate in activities that exceed their normal expertise while maintaining the appearance of normal life that prevents enemy intelligence from recognizing the strategic significance of civilian activities that appear unremarkable from any perspective that lacks detailed understanding of electromagnetic warfare applications. The bread production continues throughout the war, serving both civilian nutritional needs and military deception requirements with efficiency that demonstrates how civilian infrastructure can support strategic objectives when creative adaptation transforms normal commercial activities into military assets that enemy intelligence cannot identify or target because they appear to serve only normal, peacetime functions that pose no strategic threat to military operations. The technical innovations that Thomas and the military engineers develop influence post-war radar technology, electronic warfare systems, civilian broadcasting applications that require precise electromagnetic control for purposes that range from weather monitoring to satellite communications. The principles discovered through wartime adaptation of civilian ovens for military deception become foundation knowledge for industries that depend on sophisticated understanding of electromagnetic wave propagation through complex atmospheric conditions. Years later, when historians examine the statistical evidence of German bomber effectiveness during different phases of the war, they identify significant decreases in successful penetration of British airspace that correlate with the implementation of the Bakery Deception Program. Tactical changes in German route planning that suggest respect for defensive capabilities that existed primarily in the radar signatures generated by modified civilian ovens, rather than actual military aircraft deployment. Thomas returns to normal commercial baking after the war, but his understanding of oven operation includes knowledge that proves valuable in the post-war food industry, where precise temperature, control, and energy efficiency become increasingly important as commercial baking operations adapt to peacetime economic conditions and consumer expectations that reflect both wartime scarcity experience and post-war prosperity that allows increased attention to food quality rather than simple nutritional adequacy. The bakery building still stands in Kent, its modified chimney system now purely decorative since modern commercial ovens operate according to different engineering principles that prioritize energy efficiency and automated control rather than the manual operation that allowed Thomas to generate electromagnetic signatures that confused German radar operators for 2 critical years of aerial warfare that determined whether Britain would survive to participate in the eventual Allied victory. But the lessons persist in military electronic warfare doctrine that emphasizes creative adaptation of civilian resources for strategic purposes, in engineering principles that recognize how traditional technologies can serve modern military applications through innovative modification, in tactical planning that considers how electromagnetic deception can multiply defensive effectiveness without proportional increases in actual military resources deployed for conventional defensive purposes. The electromagnetic signatures that once convinced German bomber crews they faced heavy fighter opposition in empty Kent airspace represent early application of principles that modern electronic warfare employs on vastly larger scales, with sophisticated technology that traces its theoretical foundation to discoveries made when a village baker's modified ovens accidentally became the most effective radar deception system in the European theater of operations. Sometimes the most sophisticated solutions emerge from the simplest circumstances, when creative adaptation transforms civilian resources into military assets through applications that nobody trained to recognize. When traditional technologies serve modern strategic purposes through modifications that seem obvious, only after someone discovers their unexpected effectiveness through accidental experimentation forced by wartime resource limitations. The smoke that rises from Thomas Hartwell's ovens no longer confuses enemy radar operators or protects British airspace through electromagnetic deception, but the principles he helped develop continue influencing how military planners understand the relationship between civilian infrastructure and strategic capability, how engineers approach problems that require creative solutions outside conventional military technology, how ordinary people can contribute to extraordinary achievements when circumstances require adaptation beyond normal expertise. If stories like this remind you that innovation often emerges from unexpected combinations of traditional knowledge and modern necessity, that civilian creativity can solve military problems that conventional approaches cannot address, then perhaps there are other moments when ordinary people achieved extraordinary results through applications that nobody thought to attempt until circumstances forced creative adaptation of familiar resources for unfamiliar purposes. The bread that sustained his community during wartime shortages required the same technical expertise that protected British airspace through radar deception, demonstrating that traditional skills often contain applications that become apparent only when creative necessity forces recognition of possibilities that normal circumstances never reveal. When survival requires solutions that exist outside conventional understanding of how civilian and military resources relate to strategic objectives that determine the outcome of conflicts that reshape how ordinary people understand their role in extraordinary circumstances.